Its emission reduction goals, or INDC, that is intended nationally determined contribution targets to the United Nations last Thursday ahead of the upcoming UN climate talks that will focus on drafting a new global climate change plan. India has pledged to reduce its intensity of carbon emissions by 33 to 35% by 2030 from 2005 levels, also promised to get 40% of its electricity by sources other than fossil fuels by the same deadline, and committed to create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 through additional tree cover. India is the world's third biggest emitter and is expected to play a key role in December's climate conference that will bring together over 190 countries to work together to cap global temperature rise at 2 degrees Celsius. Today in Public Forum, we discuss India's ambitious plan, the targets it has set for itself, and whether they are achievable. And to talk about India's goals, we have with us in the studios an eminent panel. Please welcome Urmi Goswami, an assistant editor with the Economic Times. Welcome to the program, Urmi. Sitting next to her is Ashok Sajanhar. He is a former diplomat. Welcome to the program, Ambassador Sajanhar. We are also joined by Anup Punya. He is India Program Officer at the Climate Action Network South Asia. Welcome to the program, Mr. Punya. And before we...
GDP by 33 to 35%, and we are sure we will achieve at least 35 by 2030 from 2005 level, to create additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent through additional forest and tree cover. We are not part of the problem, but we want to be part of solution.
All right, Prakash Javadekar, Environment Minister, there elaborating India's much-awaited targets to cut carbon emissions. Urmi, let me begin the discussion with you. You know, the last time you and I sat here and talked about this issue, we were speculating as to, what India's targets would look like. Any surprises there?
No, not really. I mean, I know that there is a general expectation that India could have done more, and perhaps calculations show that India could have done more happening. So we don't really know how much energy use is involved. So we could have had a higher target. But the fact of the matter remains that we have to understand the INDC as part, not just as a domestic document. It is actually a commitment to the international community. It's part of a negotiation. So there are two important factors that we mustn't lose sight of. One is that India has huge developmental deficits, right, and those have to be met. And the second is that there's a new text that's out yesterday, but as such there's still no clarity from the negotiations, particularly on finance and technology. So only when there is clarity can we be speaking about more ambition. So within that scope, India's targets are ambitious but achievable. India has also made it very clear that this is dependent on what happens in Paris. So if you get better signals from Paris, they could do more. And India has reserved the right to give additional submissions. So this is to be seen as not the ceiling but the floor. And to be understood that when a country is putting forward its INDC, it may be nationally determined, but it's also in relation to what other countries are doing.
Okay.
So if you look at the larger community of nations and the missions they have put forward, India's targets are ambitious and definitely achievable.
Okay. And help us understand how other emitters, where other emitters stand, and particularly the United States and China.
Works out to some 17% from 1990 levels, I think. I mean roughly, and so for them it's not developmental deficit but political issues that hem them. China has said that it will peak by 2030, but It also has an emission intensity target. It is also, interesting, if you look at the China INDC, it talks about having 100%, 100 gigawatts, doing a whole lot. As I said again, could we be more ambitious? Of course we could be more ambitious, but this plan, this 15-year plan, because it's not as if from 2015 to 2020 nothing will happen. We already have a target of 20 to 25% reduction. It's 15 years plan, and the 15 years plan is as INDC puts it, is estimated to cost $2.5 trillion. So you don't know what kind of money is going to come in. You don't know technology.
We will talk about it. We'll discuss it in greater detail, issues surrounding funding and so on. But Ambassador Sajjan, our targets, it seems they match well with that of United States and China, which are the top two polluters, and we'd still be polluting much less, per capita than them. But how do you view India's INDCs? You think they are achievable or too ambitious, or as Urmi says, we could have done more?
No, I think we definitely can do more. We could have done more, but this is the beginning of a process of negotiation. So when you are entering into negotiations, you don't reveal all your cards, and so this is the first, so to say, gambit that has been, this is the first offer that has been made, and depending upon how things evolve and how things shape up in Paris, of course we can up this, we can increase this, we can make them more ambitious. And I think also we need to understand what is it that we are prepared to do domestically and what is it that we are prepared to do internationally. Because you take a commitment internationally that up to 2030 this is the sort of target that you are going to achieve, but domestically, voluntarily, because obviously I think we also need to realize, and I think this realization definitely is within the government and within the policy makers, that we are doing this not because there is so much of pressure from outside, but we need to do it for ourselves. So whether it is in terms of generating also domestic sources, I agree definitely that we will have to sort of two basic fundamental points in terms of financing or whatever we do, and technology, whatever we are getting from outside. But I think the final outcome document that emerges out of Paris, we will also need to ensure what are the responsibilities of the developed countries and what are the commitments that are being made by developing countries. Because I think equity and equitable contribution has to be the foundation, the fundamental rock on which the whole outcome has to be constructed, has to be built. So on that account, I think the sort of things we have said in terms of reduction of emission intensity of GDP by 33-35%, also in terms of contributing 40% of the electricity through fossil fuels, and there we have to see how to go about it, because I think initially when we were planning, there is such a large number of energy components which go into the mix of renewable energy. For instance, if I were to take at least two aspects which are really not going to work for us. Number one, in terms of hydroelectricity, of the possibility of acquiring land for such big projects, that will be a problem. As far as nuclear energy is concerned, we had, when the India-US nuclear deal was signed in 2008, then we had sort of very ambitious targets of 62,000 megawatt, if my memory serves me correctly, by 2032. So maybe we could put it about 60 gigawatts by 2030. But I think today, after we put on was to be made critical. So I think as far as hydro and nuclear, will not really be able to get
solar
much
and wind.
Gujarat. So we see that what was earlier in the climate action plan, solar action plan of 20 50 gigawatts by 2022. That has been hiked up to 100 gigawatts as far as solar 5 gigawatts. Now I see that in this INDC that has been given to the UN agencies, that we have mentioned about the 175 gigawatts that we are going to, but how that these targets, at least as far as renewable energy is concerned, are going to be rather ambitious if we are going to expand it to 175, because the time that is available is not too much, up to 2022. And then also if you are talking about the carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, that also to me sounds somewhat ambitious, because there in terms of afforestation, in terms of getting cover.
Right, Ambassador, I'll tell you what, we'll talk about it in greater detail. We'll also talk about India's renewable energy targets. But Mr. Punia, I'd like your first thoughts on India's INDCs. How do you view them?
Well, in looking in the context of the international ambition scenario at the moment, I think it's a very optimistic and a positive INDC. It's our own analysis in Can South Asia terms, keeping ceteris paribus. If you look at the ambition that has been put forward, the INDC is put forward by other developed countries, in that context, I think India is doing pretty well, because, or rather, at comparable levels to EU and US. And like Ambassador was saying, there's no point in revealing your cards so soon when, and it's the only first offer. So yes, I think in the next 15 years, it's what the minister has also noted, that INDC is encouraging the country to plan for 15 years rather than 5 years. It's a good sign. Is that the momentum and the ambition within the UNFCCC process seems to be slow and low, but visits that the PM is doing across the world, forging collaboration. It's a good sign that I think the INDC is pretty outstanding in that case.
And do you think the fact that India was one of the last major economies to reveal or disclose this plan, that in any way is going to affect our position in Paris?
Not really. It was the time allocated to us and we used it to the fullest. Why should there be any hurry? Because let's again come back to the point that India is it's usually misunderstood in the international forum. And from that point of view, there are a lot of considerations that the country like India needs to have. The minister had noted in one of his previous speeches that there is a whole exercise that has happened, that has gone into making this IND, and they are not in the same position like the developed countries who are very straightforward equation to look after. And I think the one analogy that is usually given is that if you have 3 hours for an exam, you're not a criminal or you're not a defaulter if you submit 1 minute before the deadline. So it's fine, I think.
Okay, Urmi, would like to comment on that?
Yeah, I just want to say, one, it doesn't matter, because the 1st October deadline was an informal deadline, an accepted deadline, and we made it in time. So there was no rush. But more importantly, as Anup was mentioning, this is the first time that actually there was a conversation between the Ministry of Environment and all the other constituent ministries which actually have to deal have all these consultations. You know, today the person in Chhattisgarh also knows what INDC is. It's not something unknown. Or the person in Jharkhand with so much forest knows what INDC is. Earlier it wouldn't be the case. So that whole discussion that happened, that takes time.
Right.
So a robust exercise was done. You know, so it's almost like we have moved from and if you look at the INDC, in a sense we have moved from that whole. It's not that we have left our principles back from what we have to do. But we are saying, this is what we have done, this is what we are going to do. And this is the way we think of doing our bit to address this global problem. So I think there should be no worry on the count that we gave it on 1st October.
Okay, Ambassador, you wanted to come in here?
Well, just very briefly, I think the fact, you know, it might seem as very symbolic or just a semantic change, but the fact that the Ministry of Environment and Forest has also been renamed as Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, I think that has helped to bring, you know, otherwise the climate change was no one's baby and everyone's baby, because everyone was sort of, you know, trying to deal with it but not really taking any responsibility for it. Whether it was the Ministry of External Affairs, whether it was the Ministry of Environment and Forest, whether it was the Prime Minister's office, I think today you have a nodal ministry. And being a nodal ministry, they have the, you know, in the business of work, they can get all the other ministries, whether it is coal, whether it is power, whether it is rural development, whether it is agriculture, all those who have a contribution, who have a role to play, they can all come under that cover and they can sort of, you know, start discussing that. So I think that has been some sort of an advantage that it has, we have been able to put a comprehensive offer, comprehensive proposal, and this is what we have presented, and of course we'll see how to take it forward. But from you know, all indications so far, and you know, if you would recall that when the Prime Minister had gone to the United States last year in September, then all the newspapers were full of, just before that Obama and China, they had an agreement on climate change, and everyone was thinking that there is going to be so much of pressure that is going to be put on our Prime Minister. But I think our government and the Prime Minister, everyone has taken it you know, in a very positive and you know, to use a cricket term, on the front foot, you know, rather than sort of always being defensive and trying to be apologetic or trying to be, you know, explaining what our position is. I think we have, right from the first day that the Prime Minister has said that we are going to play a very significant, a very meaningful role, and this is going to be, you know, in Paris. And I think the sort of proposal that
in December this year. On that note, we slip into a short break here. Stay with us. Our discussion continues on the other side.
हर साल देश में 2 से 8 अक्टूबर तक मनाया जाता है वन्य प्राणी सप्ताह। लोकसभा टेलीविजन पेश कर रहा है उन चुनिंदा पशु पक्षियों के बारे में।
किताबें बहुत कुछ बोलती हैं, लेखनी चलती है और रच जाता है एक नया संसार। किताबों की खामोशी को आओ पहचाने, उसकी दुनिया को समझें।
You see, you analyze, and You elect. Now, what your elected representatives think. Strategize and plan.
All that you wanted to see, everything related to your health is what we tell you in Healthy India.
You see, you analyze, and you elect. Now, what your elected representatives think. Strategize and
affect a forum for all viewpoints.
All that you wanted to know. Related to your health is what we tell you in Healthy India.
किताबें बहुत कुछ बोलती हैं, लेखनी चलती है और रच जाता है एक नया संसार। किताबों की खामोशी को आओ पहचानें, उसकी दुनिया को समझें और जानें। साहित्य संसार में हर रविवार शाम 7:30 बजे।
आवाज फिर आवाज है, कभी पास कभी दूर पहुंचती है आवाज, रोके कब रुकती है आवाज। आज यही आवाज बन के आ रही है आपकी आवाज। आम, सबसे आम मगर सबसे खास, लोकसभा टेलीविजन।
हर साल देश में 2 से 8 अक्टूबर तक मनाया जाता है वन्य प्राणी सप्ताह। लोकसभा टेलीविजन पेश कर रहा है उन चुनिंदा पशु पक्षियों के बारे में जानकारियों का एक विशेष कार्यक्रम जिनकी प्रजातियां खतरे में हैं। मैं हूं अभिलाष खांडेकर और आपके लिए लेकर आया हूं वन्य प्राणी सप्ताह विशेष।
Welcome back to Public Forum. We are talking about India's climate action plan and whether it is achievable. Right, Mr. Puni, I'll continue the discussion with you. If you look at the 33 to 35% reduction in emission intensity, it seems we are on target to fulfill that particular commitment, but going beyond that, how difficult is it going to be?
Well, some estimates say that for the previous target we have already achieved about 12%, and we still have about 5 years left, and we have enhanced it to 30 to 35%. So it seems doable. It seems doable also because there is momentum in the country to include more sectors which will help in reducing the intensity. There is due or it was high time, but now there is due which is important, which is good, and I think that will really help the country move forward. What we still need to figure out is whether the non-fossil fuel target, the 40%, will be part of the emissions intensity, or is it going to be additional?
Okay.
If it is additional, then the plan that India submitted becomes all the more ambitious and all the more better for the world. So that clarity is still needed, but even without that, I think we're standing a good chance.
Urmi, what do you think?
So which basically means by 2020 you would have got 21%. And the 33 to 35%, now it takes a GDP assumption of 8% growth, whereas the previous one took a GDP assumption of 9%. Now, of course, that basically means the higher the GDP, the easier it is to, cut your intensity, because emission intensity is actually reduced it per unit of per dollar of GDP. Now, if you do this rough calculation of 1.5%, actually it's achievable. And as Anup mentioned, that you have increased the number of sectors. Energy efficiency. Though I disagree with Anup on one thing, energy efficiency has been actually part of our core it forward. But this is one area where we have worked a lot on. And if actually the 20 to 25% reduction rests a lot on this, on the energy efficiency. And if you remember our National Action Plan, that one put out in 2007, one of the few missions that was actually working was the efficiency mission. So I think it's doable. I mean, as I said, it's ambitious but achievable.
Mr. Punia, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly respond to one thing that, yes, the energy efficiency process has been a star performer for the country. BEE, Bureau of Energy Efficiency, has done really well. We all acknowledge that. But a few ironies existed. For example, BEE was housed under the Ministry of Power, whose sole mandate was to increase coal production. So there were some ironies like that. Energy efficiency has so far, so from that perspective, and this is not restricted to India, my comment was not restricted to India. At a global perspective, energy efficiency has always been little sidelined or backtracked, but now it has been given due focus, and I think that's right.
Okay, Ambassador Sajana?
Maybe one comment I could possibly add there is that particularly for an economy like India, and as far as India is concerned, we have made significant progress as for air conditioners for different industries, a large number of industries. It has got under its ambit. So I think that has really helped. But the point that I wanted really to make is that for a country like India, which is growing, which is developing, which has such a huge infrastructure deficit, which has such a huge construction deficit, and in terms of urbanization is going to take place. I think this is the right time to really be focusing on energy efficiency, because the new whether it is factories, whether it is buildings, whether it is residential complexes, how to go about it so that you do not make the same mistakes either that were made by us earlier or that have been made by other countries in terms of using energy intensive systems. And I have been to a number of countries where again there is development, there is more construction going on, and there how to use natural light, how to use sunlight, and that is not in terms of also increasing the energy efficiency of existing equipment or existing systems that we have. But basically India is a country which is blessed with good sunlight throughout the year, really. and most of us. So how are we able to design architecturally, how are we able to put all this together so that this reduces our dependence on energy purchases?
Let me put that to Urmi. As you also said, these targets have to be looked at, in the light of India's developmental needs, our infrastructure needs, and of course with the government's whole push with the infrastructure development, smart cities and so on. What do we do, how do we go beyond just, individual levels of, using CFLs and LEDs, and perhaps the industry has to step in here?
Well, of course, I mean, there has to be individual action, there has to be community action, and there has to be industry action, as well as government action. Government action happens through policy, individual action happens through, choices we make on whether we use an LED bulb or an incandescent, or whether we take out the car for a short trip. Those are individual transport system for one. Transport is a big issue. So if you integrate your various forms of public transport, you could perhaps actually encourage more people to shift from their personal cars to a public transport system, or this whole thing about buildings. The fact is that in most of our flats, if even in broad daylight, for some rooms you have to turn on the light. Why should it be like that? So you actually create building codes. That buildings are part of one of the areas which are going to be looked in as part of the INDC. So that when all the industries along the Ganga were asked to go zero liquid discharge, and also to have continuous monitoring of their emissions. So again, then there is a realization that you can't keep polluting. We know what each unit is doing, and then you know how to go after it. So yes, this is action that has to be taken at every step. I just mentioned a few, but basically it is not just the government doing policies. It's policies and how they translate for industry, what industry does, and most importantly, it's not enough that you put these things in place. You have to ensure that they are done. And I mean, everything could go awry if you don't have proper implementation.
Right. Mr. Punia, let's look at the other important element in our INDC, that is increasing the share of non-fossil fuel energy in our power generation. 40% of the total installed capacity by 2030, it says, would be based on non-fossil fuel based sources. How achievable is this particular target?
Well, I think in no certain terms it is clear and needs to be understood that this will not happen without the technologies that are needed, and the country in its INDC has listed some, as an example, some select technologies, and for that cooperation with the world is needed, but also we need to give an adequate thrust to R&D within the country, research and development, for which a certain fund has been created. We need the right policy framework to support that. One of the interesting outcomes of our Prime Minister's visit to US was it's not achievable unless the support comes in, and I think the Prime Minister using his trips very well to give that message to the world community. As far as finance is concerned, yes, there are. I think the country's economy it can take care of the finance to a large extent, but then again, it's a new territory that we are entering into. Once the climate change impacts start happening, what kind of technologies do we need to further curtail emissions? What kind of technologies we need to take care of the people? That's still an evolving area. So I think the 40% target is not entirely achievable on its own as of now. There is a certain kind of support that is needed.
Right, and what do you do about poverty? Chulhas, the people in villages, they are not way to give
that if you can get them onto LPG or kerosene, you get them off to probably safer fuels, but you can also, play around with the emissions that happen. So you have to find a way to use biomass. But biomass is also renewable energy in a way that is actually more sort of fruitful and clearly away from the traditional way of doing it. Look, as I said, the deficits, the development deficits are huge. We have a huge task before us, but it is about how you plan. You know, for the first time you have a perspective plan of 15 years. In 15 years you can plan out a whole lot of things. You can do it well. You're already made it very clear that you're going to seek out technology collaborations. The most beautiful part about doing anything in India is that your costs can come down so quickly because the number of units you need are so many that it immediately brings down costs. So yes, there are developmental issues, and that is perhaps one of the reasons why we have a, what many would call a conservative target of 33 to 35%. Or even if you look at this 40% non-fossil fuel sources, again, your current share of non-fossil fuel source from the installed capacity is about 30%. Right. Okay. So you are talking about a 10% rise. Now, our current installed capacity is about 275 gigawatts. The projections are in 2030 you will have about 820 to 870 gigawatts. So 40%, yes, it is a big deal, and yes, we will, but that is that is why we have to wait for the signals from Paris. What kind of collaborations get built? Not just the bilaterals that we do, but as a global community, how does the world come together to fulfill this, need? And as I mentioned earlier, we are talking about $2.5 trillion for 15 years. But when the government of India is talking about looking for financial, financial signals from the rest of the world, we are not just talking about committed or obligatory climate finance. We are talking about investment flows as well. Right. So, in a sense, look at the INDC as like an investment proposal. It's saying that these are the things we want to do. Come invest in India. As a matter of fact, if you go back to Mr. Javadekkar's press conference, he says that every dollar of investment that comes into India will actually help reduce more emissions and will do more developmental good. So yes, to come back to your original question, yes, there is a great sense of awareness that there are developmental deficits. But what has happened is instead of hiding behind those developmental deficits, we have said, yes, we have developmental deficits. Yes, we are a growing economy, and this is what we can do. And this is what we expect the world to do, because you committed that you will provide financial flows, and you committed technological cooperation.
But Ambassador Sajana, it all comes with a huge price tag of $2.5 trillion, an astronomical figure. Where is it going to come from?
We have been saying even for the last 5-7 years that India needs over the next 5 years about $1 to $1.5 trillion for construction of its infrastructure. So if you look at a period of about 15 years and 2.5 trillion, I don't think it is all that much. Let me make just 2 or 3 comments in this context. First, as far as funding is concerned, if we look at what has been the experience so far in terms of the GEF, the Green Fund that was established, $100 billion, it has not even been able to reach a sum of even $10 billion. And that also very recently, because, the government of Norway decided to put in some fund in that. So I think for us to bank to a significant extent, if not totally, on some funding being made available, and I think whatever fund comes here, it will really go to the least developed countries, to the poorest of the countries, and so I don't think we will be able to get any significant share out of that. I think we have to really look at generating domestic sources, resources, in terms of what has been said, that we create a green fund, we create a national adaptation fund, we have a coal cess, we reduce the fuel subsidies, etc. This is part of the package. And the other thing in this funding also is that if you look at the report that has just been brought out by the Financial Times, that India over the first 6 months has shot into the a country which is receiving the highest FDI. It has overtaken for the previous year 2014 we were number 5, and now it has overtaken even China and the United States with $31 billion coming in over the first 6 months, and China has 27 and United States has 27, China has 28. So I think in that sense, and this is what the Prime Minister also said today in Bengaluru when he was addressing the summit there with Angela Merkel, that in the world where all the economies are behaving in a rather weak manner, India is one bright spot. And I think we can see that India is one bright spot. It is a large economy, it's a big emerging economy. FDI is coming in, even as far as the competitiveness, global competitiveness index. We have moved up 16 points and so on and so forth. Ease of doing business. So, there is so much that we need to do on our own here. As far as technology is concerned, again, that will be critical, that will be crucial. But let me also make this point that while talking about funding and talking about technology, we need to continue to have a conversation, have a discussion with the developed countries to make sure that we are able to get as to the success of this plan. On the technology front also, we need to see that the Prime Minister in his meeting with President Obama on the 28th, he had said that all green technologies should be kept out in the open and they should be available for free import by developing countries. I think this is an idea which we have not taken up in the INDC. And this is something that we need to take up. This is something that we need to, that if this is to be taken as a common good, environment is a common good, then I think all the countries, all stakeholders, internationally and nationally, really need to come together to make sure that the green technologies and they are used by countries which really need them. And I think India would definitely be, a country that really would be able to put them to good use.
Okay, we'll talk more on that in just a bit. We'll slip into yet another break here in the program, but before that we'd like to thank Urmi Goswami for being with us. So thanks so much for your time. Stay with us, we'll be right back.
All that you wanted to know. All that you wanted to see. Everything related to your health is what we tell you in Healthy India.
हर साल देश में 2 से 8 अक्टूबर तक मनाया जाता है वन्य प्राणी सप्ताह। लोकसभा टेलीविजन पेश कर रहा है उन चुनिंदा पशु पक्षियों के बारे में जानकारियों का एक विशेष कार्यक्रम जिनकी प्रजातियां खतरे में हैं। मैं हूं अभिलाष खांडेकर और आपके लिए लेकर आया हूं वन्य प्राणी सप्ताह विशेष।
किताबें बहुत कुछ बोलती हैं, लेखनी चलती है और रच जाता है एक नया संसार। किताबों की खामोशी को आओ पहचाने, उसकी दुनिया को समझें और जानें। साहित्य संसार में हर रविवार शाम 7:30 बजे।
You see, you analyze, and you elect. Now, Watch your elected representatives think, strategize, and plan. Only on Lok Sabha television.
We discuss issues that concern you. Affect a forum for all viewpoints.
Public Forum, we are talking about India's ambitious climate action targets. Mr. Punya, I'll continue with. Do you wanted to make a point before you went into the break?
Correct. A few things that I wanted to say that in all of this we cannot, yes, let's not forget industry, because they and I think the Prime Minister's office and the Ministry of Environment has made it clear very much in the messaging that it's Make in India, and it's Make in India in the INDC, because A, the cost will be less for the country, so we don't really need to pay for the technology, and that's what they're trying to encourage in the cooperations that they're forging with various also about securing livelihoods, reducing costs, increasing farmers' welfare. So from that perspective, it is essential that it's not just buying technology from outside, but it's also developing in-house technology in technical cooperation. So I think that's also very
by 2030. We also know that the government's already doing a lot in this regard. The cabinet has approved a proposed legislation on a huge afforestation fund, and then they're also talking about highway tree lines and so on. But then there are some who point out that afforestation has limited utility, and it's only dense natural forests that actually have this ability to provide carbon sinks.
Correct. So on that, there is no replacement for a old naturally grown forest, which has its own benefits and lots of co-benefits for the biodiversity, for the forest dwellers, for the communities dependent on it, and yes, they act as carbon sinks, but they also add to the economy because they provide a lot of medicinal plants. They provide they are necessary for maintaining a certain geoclimate of the area, so your other sectors are dependent on the forest. So yes, their concerns are right, but then it all depends on how it pans out in the next 15 years. That it's what kind of afforestation do they pursue. But there's another glitch here, which is a lot of the money which is going to be coming would be coming from CAMPA, which means we are diverging forests, and then we are utilizing the money for the same cause. So how it really pans out on ground, it needs to be seen, and in net, do we stand as gainers or do we stand as losers, is what needs to be said.
Right. Ambassador Sajjanhar, let's focus on what's going to happen in Paris, because that's where all the action will be in December. Are we ready for the tough negotiations in Paris? What can we expect?
Yeah, I think we have always, as far as our core interests are concerned, and as far as our principles are concerned, we have never, whether it is climate change negotiations or it is trade talks, steadfastly. And I think right now, today, we are on a very good wicket, because Normally what happens is that even as far as the talks or the Bali package, you were in a corner. When something was not happening in 2008, all the blame was put. I think right now, by putting out this proposal, which has by and large been welcomed by the international community, and particularly in terms of its focus on renewables, its focus on action from our side. Not only, I think so far, we have basically used the mantra of common but differentiated responsibility, used the mantra of equity, which we will continue to plug, which we will continue to use. But along with that, we are also, I think it is also in terms of using public diplomacy, in terms of to discuss this issue and proactively speaking that we are going to be a major player. You know, like as far as foreign policy is concerned, we are, you know, what he's mentioned, we are not going to be a balancing power. We are going to be a leading power. So I think in this also we have taken a very proactive stand across the board. Of course, you know, as far as Paris is concerned, I don't think that there will be, you know, that much of pressure that we will have to contend with, you know, with this sort of a proposal, because as we've been discussing, there is a possibility of going even further, doing even better than this, you know, whether it is in terms of 40% of non-fossil fuels, renewable energy, and we have, as I mentioned earlier, 175 gigawatts, which is a huge figure. You know, if you look at it, about 250 gigawatts is our total energy production today usage, and 175 gigawatts by 2022 additional energy. I think this will be a very significant addition in that component. Or in terms of reducing the emission intensity of GDP. So I think there we have possibility of going even further, and there are other possibilities. So, but I think for us what will be essential is to get as much benefit, as much support with through collaboration with other countries, and so share with the international community, share with the world that energy and removal of poverty, they need to go hand in hand, because otherwise energy and protection of climate need to go hand in hand, otherwise it will become quite unsustainable. And if you see the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that have been adopted just about 10 days ago on the 25 to 27 summit in New York, there also there is a very important element of protection of environment. And also it is mentioned that in terms of production, in terms of consumption patterns, particularly by the developed countries, I think that will need to change, and I think that is what we all within the country, that our emission intensity is so low per capita. You know, it is about 1.5, 1.6 tons of greenhouse gases that we are emitting, as opposed to 15 tons. But I think here also we need to realize that our intensity is low because there is so much of inequity, because there is so much of disparity. And I think that also we need to consciously realize, recognize and bridge that you know, we have 30%.
Of course, we have our own developmental needs, and we have to balance out this case for foreign assistance monetarily and technologically, but do we have a clear-cut roadmap as to how we are going to use it towards achieving these goals?
Well, the country is yet to come out with, they have given an indicative number of $2.5 trillion. If the country gets on an ambitious path, the amount could increase also. But considering that certain technology prices will come down in the future, it might balance out. So that is something to be seen. In terms of creating a good momentum, I think yes, being one of the last summit we see, it stands out well, and from one of the major economies of the world. Otherwise, the UNFCCC process was suffering from low ambition. The momentum that is outside the UNFCCC process is going to help the process inside, but how soon, in what ways, that remains to be seen. We have time in the next few weeks to ensure that the deal will be taken by the country and the interested stakeholders in the world. But
and we also need to take a leadership role among the developing nations, and
which I think India is doing that. For a brief while, in my own analysis, India was region, and hopefully this momentum will continue.
All right. Well, I'm afraid we are completely out of time. I have to leave it at that. It's time for me to thank you both for coming to the studios. It was a pleasure having you here.